Are you starting a vegetable garden from scratch this season? Today I'm going to talk to you about how to get that done right. G'day there, I'm Dana from Pewalkuka Valley Homestead. Today we're going to talk about starting your own vegetable garden from scratch. With everything that's been going on recently, a lot of people are starting to look into ways to grow their own vegetables at home. We've got everybody at home today, so I have escaped to my husband's music room, hence the guitars in the background. Hopefully they won't discover me in here. So we are going to talk about how you can actually start your own vegetable garden at your place completely from scratch, even if you actually only have lawn at the moment. Growing a vegetable garden is incredibly rewarding, and it's fantastic to be able to serve up a dinner to your friends and family that are food that's grown completely from your own place. I started my gardening journey probably about 15 years ago, where we first got a mortgage and we had very little money, and so I have learnt to garden very slowly, just built it up, and now our vegetable garden pretty much feeds our family for many months of the year. The first step in starting your own vegetable garden is to find a suitable plot of land. Now, if you have a backyard that has grass on it, that is usually pretty much perfect. You want somewhere that gets preferably between 6 and 8 or more hours of sunlight a day, somewhere that's not preferably too exposed to the wind, and somewhere that preferably doesn't go really boggy and gross when it rains. Alternatively, you also don't want somewhere that dries out and turns into a rock hard dead pan in the middle of the summer. You can decide to commandeer one of your flower bed gardens that you already have and either pull out the flowers or plant some vegetables around them. The other option, of course, is to start straight on some grass. Lasagna gardening is probably the easiest way to get started if you just have grass, because using a lasagna garden bed method, you don't have to dig up, you don't have to remove the grass, and you can leave that bottom layer exactly how it is. And all you need to do is put down a good couple of layers of cardboard or a really thick layer of newspaper straight on top of the grass, and then you can add compost or manure or old leaves, or just sort of layer up things that you have, organic matter that you have, and finish it off with a nice 2-inch layer of either well rotted compost or a mixture of good quality topsoil, or even just a simple bagged potting mix will work. You just need a good 2 inches on the top of stuff that's ready to get these seeds started in. The upside to starting a lasagna bed like this is that you've got no weeds to compete with, because they're all being suppressed by that cardboard, and by the time that cardboard smothers out the grass, and the plants will start growing and they can push their roots right down into that bottom soil. If you're going to commandeer one of your existing flower beds, or you have an old vegetable garden area that hasn't been used in a long time, first thing you'll want to do is pull off all the weeds that are there. Try and get as many roots out as you possibly can. And then the next step will be to feed the soil, preferably with some well rotted compost, which you can often buy from a store, or if you're lucky, you yourself, your neighbour, a friend, family, someone may have made some. Well rotted manure is another really good additive. You just want to feed that soil biota and get everything well fed and ready to go. The next step when you are planning your vegetable garden from scratch is you can decide whether you want to buy transplants already that are grown from the store, or to grow things from seed, or to do a mixture of the two. Personally, we do a wee bit of a mixture of the two. If you buy already established transplants, they're already usually sort of 3-4 inches high. They're pretty much ready to go in the ground straight away, and that gives you time to start your own seeds as well. If you're starting seeds that are going to be frost tender, so these are the things that the frost will kill off, particularly things like tomatoes and peppers, cucumbers, zucchini, squashes, those sorts of things are all very frost tender. You'll need to find out what your local last frost date is and work out your planting from there. So you'll want to sow the seeds inside somewhere 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost date. And that's really easy to find these days. You just need to type into Google wherever you are and the words last frost date, and it will give you the date that you need to be counting backwards from. 4 to 6 weeks before then, you can sow your seeds inside and then start hardening them off, which just means to move them outside. I have a video that explains that. I'll link that up the top. You just move them outside for small amounts of time each day and bring them back inside. And when they're ready to go, that's when you then transplant them outside. So check out the video up the top it's got all about hardening off and transplanting seedlings. And I've also got another one that I'll link there as well about how to sow your first seeds as well. So the upside to buying seeds versus seedlings is you get a lot bigger range to choose from. There's a lot more heirloom varieties which you're able to save your own seeds from. To start with, if it's your very first garden, often just buying the transplants from the store that are already done, they're tried and true varieties. Often that's actually the easiest and best way of starting. And then once you're more used to looking after plants and those sorts of things, then you can look at sowing some from seed and trying some of the more interesting varieties. Some plants will grow much better from seed, and some plants you have to grow from seed right in place, right where you need them to grow. Peas and beans will grow better if you can sow them straight where they're going. Follow the instructions on the seed packets if you are sowing from seed, and even if you're buying transplants, they should have a spacing on them about how far apart you want your plants to be. And you want them to be that far apart partly because that's how big the plant grows, and partly so that they're not competing from each other. You'll get a much better harvest if your plants have enough space. Generally speaking, I usually work out how much we would usually buy from the store in a week, or actually I tend to do it for a month, and then try and plant at least that many. So if we usually go through 2 or 3 heads of broccoli in a week, I will try and do a month's worth all at once, and so I will plant 8 or 10, so I will probably plant 12 broccolis all at the same time, knowing that over the course of the month they'll probably all come ready to harvest, and that our family can get through those. It would seem silly to plant 30 things of broccoli or 2 things of broccoli when I know roughly how many our family will eat. I do have a chart that I will link down below that has sort of the rough number of whatever plants that you want to plant per person in your family, which is a really good way of working out, especially if you're wanting to rely on your garden for food, how many plants of what different type that you should be trying. If it's your very, very first garden, don't take off more than you can chew. Just start with a few things. Anything's better than nothing, right? And so start with a couple of things, and when you've got good success with those, then you can start adding some more, growing some more, and expanding your garden area. Really easy plants for people to start with, I would say, would be things like beans and peas, lettuce, salad greens, and then some of your more brassica sort of plants, so your cauliflowers, cabbage, broccoli, those sorts of things. They're really good, easy things to start with. Once you've got your plants in the ground, then the big trick is to keep them well watered while they start settling in. And if you're sowing seeds, you need to keep them moist every day, at least once a day. You need to be giving them a nice gentle sprinkle with either the hose or a watering can, just to keep them nice and moist. Carrots can be a wee bit fickle to get to germinate, so the way I like to grow them is to water the ground really, really well, and then sow a couple of rows where I want them, and then to get a board that fits over those rows and sit the board, or even sometimes a hessian sack, sit them over top of the rows. And this helps keep the moisture in, it helps stop the weeds from germinating, and it keeps the beating sun off until the carrots start to germinate. I would start checking those every day after a week. They can take up to 3 weeks to germinate. So don't give up. If they look like they're getting dry, give them a little bit more water. But with the board over the top, you'll find that they get perfectly evenly moist, and you'll get the best germination rate that way. With fresh transplants, you'll want to be watering them every day for the first week, and then you can swap to every second day, and thereafter probably 2 to 3 times a week. If your plants are starting to look wilty and sad, you've left it too long and you will have stunted their growth. Don't give up, don't panic, give them a really good water, but just know for next time you'll need to do it a little bit more frequently. Once my seedlings are in, what I really like to do is to mulch them, even just with some grass clippings works really well. You can get wood mulch quite often from, not abattoirs, what are they called? Arborists. They'll often drop some off. They do, however, want to be able to drop a whole truckload at once. So if that's too much for you, you can even just mulch them with some bought potting mix. The aim of the game with mulching is to keep the weeds down. It helps keep the moisture in, it helps keep the soil nice and warm, and it will break down. So the idea is to mulch them with something organic that will eventually start feeding the soil. Once you've got your plants in the ground and you've mulched them and you know about your watering schedule, the next thing to watch out for is pests. Where we are, slugs are a real hassle, especially for young tender greens. So I do often resort to an iron-based slug repellent that I sprinkle around. You can use crushed up eggshells. I have heard people say that coffee grounds work really well. And obviously the best way to get slugs is to put on your head torch, go out at night time, gather them up and throw them to your chickens. Other pests to baby plants can be birds. We often net ours off if they're outside our vegetable garden. Our vegetable garden is completely bird proof. We have a big roof over the top made of bird netting and fences all around the outside because I was so sick of the blackbirds digging up my seedlings that I invested in the infrastructure. But what you can do is use some black polythene hose and arch it over your garden bed, so you can put in a few stakes or bits of pole or something into the ground that you can hook that over, and then just throw some bird netting over the top, and that can be enough to keep the birds out and away from your seedlings. If your seedlings get slightly stressed, they can be subject to aphids, and aphids they're tiny little, they can be green, grey, or even white flies. They're tiny little bugs that you'll see, they kind of cluster in the nooks and crannies of the plants. The best way to get rid of those is simple soap and water. And sometimes I do soap, water and baking soda. So in just one of those little spray bottles, I'll half fill it with warm water, put a squirt of dish detergent and a teaspoon of baking soda, and give it a good shake, and then take it out and just spray the plants. And I do that every other day for about 10 days. It's usually enough to just get rid of them. Any plants that are stressed are going to be more susceptible to those sorts of things. Once your plants are ready to harvest, that's brilliant, and you can harvest them and eat them and enjoy them, but it's really good practice to have some more plants ready to go in those spaces before you take the next ones out. So this is called succession planting. So what you can usually do on the packet, it will often say days to germination, and then it will also say days to harvest. And so if you add those two numbers together, you'll have a rough idea of from when you started sowing the seeds to when you can expect the plants to be ready. So usually I count that forward on a calendar, and then I count backwards again another 4 weeks, and that's when I start my seeds that I'm going to plant in around them. Sometimes you can do it even earlier than that, and some plants you can sneak in the transplants in between them just before they're ready to harvest. So if you have big broccolis that are just about ready to grow their big broccoli heads, you could sneak some lettuce plants in amongst them, knowing that when the broccoli's finished you can take the broccoli out and the lettuce can continue to grow. That's pretty much the best way of getting the most amount of vegetables out of your one little space. Garden rotation is another thing you'll hear people talk about, and actually I buy into that a lot less than I used to. The argument being that certain plants feed the soil certain nutrients and other plants are really heavy feeders and suck the soil dry of a lot of nutrients. But if you're in the habit of putting a good couple of inches of fresh new compost on top of your soil every season, then you know that your soil is going to be well fed, and you can actually plant the same crop in the same area time and time and time again. There's a YouTuber, I used to watch him with my grandma actually when I was younger on TV. His name is Charles Dowding, and he's been doing some experiments of crop rotation or not crop rotation, and he has grown the exact same plants in the exact same space for 5 years now, and the only thing he does any different to anybody else is he always puts his 2 inches of compost every season. So he does it at least once a year. Sometimes he does it twice. He'll often do spring and autumn. And he has grown the same plants in the same space with no problems whatsoever. In fact, he just gets more and more and more yield every year. The other thing that is brilliant to do, especially if you're a new gardener, but even now I still do it, is to keep really good records of what you've planted, when you've planted it, and when they've been good to harvest, and also whether they're worth growing. I have grown some beans that were just absolutely pathetic. I know obviously some people have really good success with those particular type, otherwise they wouldn't be commercially available, but they just didn't work well for me. And then I've had other ones that have done really, really, really well some years, and then other years I've planted them too early and they've done terribly. So it's really nice to know that what week is really good to plant my beans in and which beans grow really well for me here. But I wouldn't know any of that if I didn't keep really good records. I've got a gardening journal, and in it I mark down the dates that I've planted them, the varieties that they are, where they are, when they're ready to harvest, and how much they gave me, whether they were worth growing. In there I also write down the frost date for the year, the first frost date and the last frost date, and also if there's odd weather patterns, like if it's rained for a really long time or if it was really, really hot one week, those sorts of things I mark in there as well, which is really helpful to look back on in the years to come. So if you're planning on getting started on your very first vegetable garden this year, or you really just want to up your game, these were the steps that you should take to get your vegetables off to the very best start. My next video is going to be the 20 fastest growing vegetables that you can grow to give you the best harvest, the fastest harvest. So keep an eye out for that. If you found this video helpful, I'd love it if you'd hit the thumbs up. And if you consider subscribing to our channel, we bring you videos twice a week on growing and preserving your own food and other homesteading sort of things. We'll see you in the next one.